Today we hear another episode from the life of Noah, and it's taken from Genesis chapter 9, beginning to read at verse 7. Then God said to Noah and to his sons with him, "As for me, I am establishing my covenant with you and with your descendants, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the domestic animals, and every animal of the earth with you, as many as came out of the ark. I establish my covenant with you, that never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the whole earth." God said, "This is the sign of the covenant that I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for all future generations. I have set my bow in the clouds, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. When I bring clouds over the earth, and the bow is seen in the clouds, I will remember my covenant that is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh. And the waters shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. When the bow is in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of flesh that's on the earth." And God said to Noah, "This is the sign of the covenant that I have established between me and all the flesh that is on the earth." The sons of Noah who went out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham was the father of Canaan, and these three were the sons of Noah, and from these the whole earth was peopled. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. In the preceding chapter, we have an account of the end of the flood. We know that Noah had been captured in the ark with all the creatures, and we can just imagine the noise and the smell. And Noah had sent out a bird again and again, looking for signs that the waters were receding and it was safe to let the animals out. And finally, Noah found himself setting foot back on dry land with his family. What a relief that must have been. And the first thing that he does is to build an altar and to offer a sacrifice and worship to God. You see, he'd built this ark and gone into it in obedience to God's calling. He trusted God through the flood, and he recognised God's blessing and salvation, that he was finally back on dry land. And in response, God was moved to make a promise to himself. He made a vow that never again would he act to destroy all of created life on earth. It's this promise to himself that we hear about in this chapter. He offers it to Noah as a covenant promise, a solemn vow. In biblical terms, a covenant is an agreement between two parties to behave in a certain way. Well, in this case, God is making a covenant promise. He's not asking Noah to make a promise in return. He's making a promise. But I do think maybe Noah, having been so obedient, having built the ark in the most unlikely of circumstances, having survived that period on board and saved creation, he'd already done his bit, hadn't he? And so God is responding by making a promise that he won't make it happen again, that he won't be so angry that he'll destroy the earth a second time. So God said, "I establish my covenant with you, that never again will there be a flood. And the sign of my covenant will be the bow in the sky." And we take that to be the rainbow. Traditionally, we talk about the rainbow being a sign of God's promise of love. It's an unconditional covenant promise. It doesn't depend upon Noah or we as Noah's descendants having to behave in a particular way. We don't have a part of the deal to fulfill. The promise is based entirely on God's mercy and God's faithfulness, God's love for his creation. I wonder if we can begin to imagine just how overwhelmed Noah must have felt. As I say, he stepped out not onto a rich and fruitful earth that he'd left behind, but onto an empty earth. it all had to begin again. It must have been incredibly overwhelming, but at least Noah wasn't alone. He'd got his family, he'd got his sons and their wives, he'd got his wife, he'd got all the creatures that he must have got to know while he cared for them in the ark. But above all else, he'd got God's promise. He'd got God's promise of a future, of a hope. It must have been very strange times, mustn't it? I would imagine they'd been through so much that family must have been incredibly close to each other. They've had to depend on each other through thick and thin, through hopes raised and disappointed, when again and again that bird came back without the signs of life they were looking for. So he stepped out to accept God's reassurance. He offered thanks with a sacrifice on an altar. And then he set out to embrace the new life that God had given him, had promised to him. He walked faithfully into the future, knowing that God was there already. And then God goes on to invite Noah and his family to be fruitful and to multiply, to increase in number. And that's an ongoing commission from God, to go out with him and to be fruitful in so very many ways, in the ways that we live our lives, in the ways that we care for creation, in the ways that we obey his calling again and again. God's covenant with Noah was a commitment to maintain the inherent relationship between Creator and creation. God's ongoing relationship with all of creation is present for us today, as it was for Noah then. He promised never again to destroy the earth with a flood, and the sign of God's love was very visual, very immediate. It was a rainbow, a frequently repeated reminder. I don't know about you, but whenever I see a rainbow, it makes me smile. And it makes me remember this particular story. It raises my eyes from the mundane things of the routines of daily life. And just for a brief moment, I remember that God made that promise. As life gets tough, it can be easy to lose sight of the God beside us, the God within us. It can be easy to forget that his protection and guidance and provision fill every part of our lives. When we feel overwhelmed, isolated, rudderless, God's promise holds true for us as it did for Noah. I think for me that glimpse of a rainbow is a reminder to allow God to speak to me in the everyday life, to be aware of the glimpses of the beauty and glory of God that are a real reminder of his creative powers. Most days I go for a walk in the park, normally quite early in the morning when it's quiet, and the bird song and the breeze in the trees and the scent of the flowers, they just serve to raise my eyes to God, to remind me to praise him because he created this amazing world that I'm blessed to live in. You know, when I was teaching, the children used to love the story of Noah's Ark, and they used to sing a song about Mr. Noah, who built an ark, and he filled it with all the creatures 2 by 2, and the chorus says, whenever you see a rainbow, whenever you see a rainbow, whenever you see a rainbow, remember, God is love. So as I bid you farewell today, my prayer is that you'll find a space to catch a glimpse of God's glory in the things that surround you, and that whenever you see a rainbow, you'll remember, as the children so often reminded me, that God is love.